America. And I use this subject because there are literally two Americas. One America is beautiful for a situation. And in a sense, this America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their minds, and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, millions of people experience every day the opportunity of having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. In this America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions, and they find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. Little children in this other America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental skies. And as we look at this other America, we see it as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams. Many people of various backgrounds live in this other America. Some are Mexican Americans, some are Puerto Ricans, some are Indians, some happen to be from other groups. Millions of them are Appalachian whites. Probably the largest group in this other America in proportion to its size in the population is the American Negro. The American Negro finds himself living in a triple ghetto: a ghetto of race, a ghetto of poverty, a ghetto is to deal with this problem, of the two Americas. We are seeking to make America one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now let me say that the struggle for civil rights and the struggle to make these two Americas one America is much more difficult today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. For about a decade or maybe 12 years, we struggled all across the South in glorious struggles to get rid of legal, overt segregation and all of the humiliation that surrounded that system of segregation. In a sense, this was a struggle for decency. We could not go to a lunch counter in so many instances and get a hamburger or a cup of coffee. We could not make use of public accommodations. Public transportation was segregated, and often we had to sit in the back, and within transportation within cities, we often had to stand over empty seats because sections were reserved for whites only. We did not have the right to vote in so many areas of the South. And the struggle was to deal with these problems. Now, certainly they were difficult problems. They were humiliating conditions. By the thousands, we protested these conditions. We made it clear that it was ultimately more honorable to accept jail cell experiences than to accept segregation and humiliation. By the thousand, students and adults decided to sit in at segregated lunch counters to protest conditions there. When they were sitting at those lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and seeking to take the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Many things were gained as a result of these years of struggle. In 1964, the Civil Rights Bill came into being after the Birmingham movement, which did a great deal to subpoena the conscience of a large segment of the nation to appear before the judgment seat of morality on the whole question of civil rights. After the Selma movement in 1965, we were able to get a voting rights bill. Now, all of these things represented strides, but we must see that the struggle today is much more difficult. It's more difficult today because we are struggling now for genuine equality. And it's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee a livable income and a good, solid job. It's much easier to guarantee the right to vote than it is to guarantee the right to live in sanitary, decent housing conditions. It is much easier to integrate a public park than it is to make genuine, quality, integrated education a reality. And so today we are struggling for something which says we demand genuine equality. It's not merely a struggle against extremist behavior toward Negroes. And I'm convinced that many of the very people who supported us in the struggle in the South are not willing to go all the way now. I came to see this in a very difficult and painful way in Chicago over the last year where I've lived and worked. Some of the people who came quickly to march with us in Selma and Birmingham were active around Chicago. And I came to see that so many people who supported morally and even financially what we were doing in Birmingham and Selma were really outraged against the extremist behavior of Bull Connor and Jim Clark toward Negroes, rather than believing in genuine equality for Negroes. And I think this is what we've got to see now, and this is what makes the struggle much more difficult. And so as a result of all of this, we see many problems existing today that are growing more difficult. It's something that is often overlooked, but Negroes generally live in worse slums today than 20 or 25 years ago.
feeling frustrated and overwhelmed from all the destruction and misery in certain parts of town, Augustus Corbett cried out to God. The Lord answered with these words, "Take them my kingdom." With this divine mandate, Augustus Corbett Ministries was birthed to take the kingdom of God to unchurched people, teach them biblical principles of kingdom living, and transform them into authentic Christ followers. God is now using Augustus Corbett Ministries to repair broken people and return these once broken people to their communities so they can reproduce the kingdom of God. We invite you to partner with us as we share the gospel of the kingdom and the love of Jesus Christ with people near and far. Welcome to Kingdom Encounter.
Welcome. Hello, everybody. This is Pastor Corbett, and I have my lovely wife, Antonia Corbett. We thought we would just come on in and break on through today without further ado. We're getting a little bit of a late start, and we also shared a lengthy portion of what I think is a classic speech by what I believe, or who I believe is the greatest American ever, and that is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as you see from the title of this message, Dr. King, his words were very, very appropriate for what we're going to talk about today. And you also see that I brought with me some backup today. Amen. I brought not only some backup, but some beautiful backup to bring some beauty to the screen and some grace and so forth. So I am so happy to have with me my wife of over 31 years now, Sister Antonia Corbett.
33.
I'm going to just stop. I'm going to just stop with this, with these numbers.
You mattered in math.
I should know better. I should know better. 88 in 2021 equals 33 years. You're absolutely right. Amen. Thank you. I'm sorry. All right.
Problem.
Yeah. So listen, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real controversial, real popular buzzword that's going around now that you'll be tackling today. So yeah, I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Well, yes, and let me say something. I know we may not have to say this, but let me just say this. You every day you work for the state of Texas.
Yes.
And we know the state of Texas is fairly hostile to the whole subject of critical race theory. And we don't want to do anything to cause you to be crosswise of our great state of Texas and its conservative leadership. Let me put it that way. So
Yes.
all that I say today is what I believe to be the case, but it is definitely not necessarily what you believe, and it's certainly not representative of your employer, the state of Texas, Child Protective Services, and all of that. So you didn't ask me to say that, but I thought I would just say it on your behalf.
Okay. Well, we have the disclaimer. So I guess we are ready to get rolling.
All right, very good. So you're gonna facilitate the conversation and kind of, I guess, ask my thoughts on this very, as you said, controversial topic of critical race theory. Now, before we unleash you, let me say that the title of this message today, a biblical and legal response to critical race theory. So I am a pastor. I am a committed Christ follower. So my biblical knowledge and acumen certainly informs everything that I believe. I'm not like a lot of pastors who will avoid the tough issues. I like to dive right in, be honest with you. And so this has been the talk of Christians. This has been the talk of churches. This has been the talk of politicians for the last few months, even longer. So look, I thought we would dive in as well. All right. Also, before we dive in, let's make sure we're not getting any feedback. Let's make sure everything is going okay. If somebody would let us know that things are going fine, that would be
Yes.
so helpful. Otherwise, I am going to switch it over to you, sweetheart, and you can take it and run with it.
Okay. Okay. I think everything is okay. I haven't received any messages. Okay, so we are talking about a biblical and legal response to critical race theory this morning. And like Pastor Corbett said, he's not bashful or hesitant to deal with current, relevant topics that topics that may be affecting the body of Christ as well as our culture in general. So I appreciate you, Pastor Corbett, for dealing with these issues. And I appreciate that you are so uniquely qualified as being a licensed attorney within the state of Texas as well as a gospel preacher. And let me just say the gospel preachers first. You've been a gospel preacher since I've known you, and you were preaching before we married. So I'm glad that you were able to bring the two together. I don't know if you realize it or remember it, but on my online community, I had began seeing the word critical race theory, CRT. Do you remember I came to you one day and said, "Well, what is all this CRT about?" I'm just seeing preachers, and then I'm seeing politicians dealing with talking about critical race theory. They're getting into a debate, online, and you began to share with me your knowledge about critical race theory. So now we are going to allow a larger audience to know and have a better understanding what it is. So, with that being said, I want to ask you what sparked your interest in critical race theory?
Okay, do you mind if I divert for a moment before I start answering your question?
No, no, not at all.
Okay, so let me remind the audience that I actually wrote a book that is related to the topic of critical race theory. And the name of that book is Education and Justice. And yeah, this book deals a lot with critical race theory. And, when I was researching this book many years ago, that was really around the time that I became familiar with critical race theory. And so I guess that is a great jumping off start. I notice I'm a little bit preoccupied here because we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. I don't know if anybody can see it, but we are. And I'm trying to see if I can fix it while we're talking, but maybe not. And I don't even know if anyone see it, but now they're probably looking for it. Like, what is he talking about? So wow, man, all of this is going on anyway, I guess I'm just gonna have to go on. Just gonna have to go on. Just gonna have to go on. Just gonna have to go on.
Well, I can talk if you want to continue to try to fix it. I can just,
Well, I don't know if I can fix it without interrupting everything, so
okay.
I guess I'm gonna have to try to keep going on. If I try to fix it, it may it may get worse. So let's see here. Let's just see. Maybe I can figure it out right here real quick. You all please be patient, be patient, be patient. And just all of a
Yes, I hope
sudden, go ahead.
hope everyone is having a happy Sunday. It's beautiful today here in the state of Texas. So I hope everybody is doing well. And next Sunday is Father's Day. In fact, today I found out, every month there is some type of awareness. Today is Children's Day. So for all of the parents out there who have children, we want to say Happy Children's Day. Thank God for your children that you have been honored to have the privilege of raising children. And if your children are grown, thank God that you were blessed by God to raise them to become adults. So we just want to shout out to that. And next Sunday, we'll be celebrating Father's Day. So,
Okay. I don't know if I was able to fix it, but let's see. Anyway, we got to go on, sweetheart.
okay,
I, I
okay.
couldn't get it fixed. Technology. All right, so you asked me about CRT. I'm going to abbreviate it, critical race theory. I'm going to abbreviate it with CRT. Now,
Okay.
so yes, CRT exploded in recent years. I believe it exploded largely because of the Trump administration. His administration, as we know, sort of galvanized white supremacists around the country, and once those white supremacists sort of came to, kind of surrounded him, I think they began to share with him a lot of the gripes that white Americans have with the country, especially after having elected and reelected the first black president. And one of those gripes was how CRT, critical race theory, was changing the country. So, I think it's also associated with the 1619 Project that, kind of gave a narrative, a history of racism and slavery in this country. And, white Americans, certain white Americans took serious issue with that. And I think that
Hmm.
began to sort of focus them in on critical race theory. And that kind of started sort of a snowball effect because white politicians followed Trump, and they too began to attack and assail critical race theory.
Okay.
If you recall, Trump banned the teaching of critical race theory in diversity training programs in the federal government. And most recently, the Southern Baptist Convention, all of their seminaries basically said there could be no critical race theory, or they sort of condemned critical race theory from being taught and embraced by their seminaries and by their adherents. And we also know the state of Georgia recently issued a resolution banning the teaching of critical race theory in its public schools. In fact, there's a quote here that I want to read from that resolution to show
Okay.
you just how ridiculous this resolution is and how ridiculous it is, all of this hysteria around critical race theory. So I'm going to quote, it's kind of lengthy, but it's so important, from the Georgia Board of Education's resolution banning critical race theory. Quote, We believe that no teacher, administrator, or other employee in any state education agency, school district, or school administration shall approve for use, make use of, or carry out standards, curricula, lesson plans, textbooks, instructional materials, or instructional practices that serve to inculcate in students the following concepts. And what concepts? The concepts that, again, are just ridiculous to me. Any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex. Now that sounds kind of bland on its face, but really, they're really directing that to white students because they're essentially saying they don't want teachers teaching that America that America legalized enslavement of African Americans, Jim Crow, and all of that, because that then would make white kids feel guilty. Had a brother to say something to me yesterday that I think was very, very insightful. He said he was in a meeting with some other whites and a lady started crying after hearing him speak. And she said, well, you know, I don't want to feel guilt as a white person. And he said, guilt is not what I think you should feel either. What I think you should feel is godly sorrow for how African Americans have been treated and other ethnic groups in this country. So not guilt, but godly sorrow. It goes on to say, the advent of slavery in the territory that is now the United States constituted the true founding of the United States. We know very well that the advent of slavery was an integral part of the founding of the United States of America. That is not even controversial.
Right.
Or that with respect to their relationship to American values, slavery and racism are anything other than deviations from, betrayals of, or failures to live up to the authentic founding principles of the United States, which include liberty and equality. How preposterous for this resolution to say that slavery and racism were a deviation. If it was a deviation, I agree with Charles Blow, who said it was a 250, 60-year deviation. It was a deviation that was embraced by nearly all the founders of this country. It was a deviation that continues to this very day. So it is false to say that it was or is, that racism and slavery is a deviation. It is quintessential America, and I'll talk about that later. So that is a resolution that was passed by the Georgia Board of Education that pretty much said no critical race theory teaching in Georgia schools. And most recently, Florida banned critical race theory and the 1619 Project from its schools. And other states are following suit, including our state here of Texas.
Yes. So thank you for sharing that, because as I said, I had began to see it some months back um, online. And as you stated, the Southern Baptist Convention, in fact, the debate I was following, um, the debate was between, some theologians in the Southern Baptist denomination. The black ones were being very disheartened that the whites, were so demonizing this theory, the critical race theory. So that's when I came and asked you, well, what in the world is all of this going on? This CRT. So thanks for sharing that. And like you said, with the 1619 project, and I hope most people out there are familiar with that, but that was something that Nicole Hannah Jones, she was like the lead on it. a journalist. She was recapturing America's history because in 2019 we celebrated the 400th year of the first Africans being brought over here and enslaved in this country. So there was a big
Yes.
celebration, if you all remember, in 2019, and the project that she was the lead on from a journalistic perspective was called the 1619 Project. And like you
Right.
said, all of that kind of snowballed, and that's when this critical race theory came back up. But you're going to let us know more about critical race theory because it's been around for a while now. So let me ask you this, Pastor Corbett, who have you who have you studied to learn what critical race theory is?
Oh, okay, so my introduction to critical race theory actually began in 2000, a little bit over 20 years ago, as I
Okay.
sat in a law school class. The name of that law school class was Common Law, and it was taught by a friend of mine who is a professor there at Regent University School of Law, where I did my first year of law school. And anyone
And
who
he
knows
became
Regent,
dean. Didn't he become dean of the law school at one point?
yes, Professor Hernandez later became dean. And again, we became friends. And anyone who knows Regent University knows that it was founded by Pat Robertson, who is an extremely conservative, white evangelical person. He founded the school, and so it's very conservative. The school
Hmm.
is itself. And so as I sat in this class, I enjoyed the class. The class was a very good class, and Professor Hernandez, a great professor, a good friend, strong Christian. And he mentioned critical race theory. And I had not heard the term, I don't think, before that point. And he mentioned it in such a way that I knew after class was over, I needed to study what this was all about. Okay, just the way he mentioned it. And so I began to study critical race theory from that point forward. So when you ask, what have I studied to learn about critical race theory over the years, it's been a lot of information. And critical race theory has become so pervasive in American thought life that we all have been reading and partaking of critical race theory and not really knowing it. Okay?
Hmm.
It's been out here now for quite some time. And that's what kind of just frightens a lot of whites. The fact that it has grown and has become a part of, in some law schools, mainstream thinking. Okay? So, yeah, my journey with critical race theory started many years ago. And I knew when I began to study it that I agreed with most of what it said. Okay? Not all of it. It's
Okay.
not the Bible. Okay?
Right,
So,
right,
only the Bible. I agree with everything that only the Bible says, is what I'm trying to say.
right. Thank you. Say that again. Say that again because I think some people act as if, you can't say, well, no, I agree with this part, but not that part. It's like you got to take the baby and the bath water and everything together.
Yes,
So could you repeat
generally,
that?
absolutely. Generally, I agree with mostly all of what is believed from a critical race theorist, but not all. I don't agree with all of it. So, as you just said, we can eat the meat, spit out the bones. We don't have to throw away the baby with some of the bath water. Okay, we
Right,
can just get rid of the dirty bath water and keep the rest of it.
right.
And that's the way I see CRT. Now, critical race theory began You could go back to sort of the 70s, but it really began to take hold primarily in law schools in the 80s and 90s, okay? And it was because a lot of professors, civil rights lawyers, law students, and remember the 70s, 80s were several decades after one of the biggest civil rights cases was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was Brown versus the Board of Education. So 20 years, 20 or so years after Brown, expectations had been high, but results were not what one expected from the Brown decision. So again, civil rights lawyers, African American primarily, some Hispanics, began to just sort of really question the state of American jurisprudence of the legal system. So critical race theory really has its roots in the legal profession, in the scholars and academicians of the legal world. They're the ones who kind of started the critical race theory. And notable scholars such as Professor Derrick Bell Jr., Professor Richard Delgado, Kimberly Crenshaw, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. You might remember the name Lani Guinier, who was a close friend of Bill and Hillary Clinton. In fact, she was nominated to be a part of their administration. I forgot what particular position.
I think Attorney General. I believe it was Attorney General.
Okay,
Is what
okay,
I'm thinking.
might have been Attorney General or Secretary of Treasury, or so. I can't remember. You may be right. But anyway, her nomination got blocked because she was controversial, having associations and affiliations with critical race theorists, and being one herself. So these brilliant, mainly Ivy League professors, minority professors and civil rights lawyers were disheartened from the results, the lack of results from the Brown case. And they began to just really question the state of the legal system in America. Okay? So that's sort of a brief history of critical race theory.
Okay. Well, now at this point, if you can define for the audience what is critical race theory, because I'm telling you, I was so surprised, Pastor Corbett, when I found out its origin was from legal scholars, because I hear so many ministers and gospel preachers and believers discussing this now, along with the politicians. So that just lends, it makes me think that they may not really understand what critical race theory is and just have their talking points because if it's coming from legal scholars, they have been trained in the law. And, most preachers have not been trained in the law. And so I really hope that you can just give us a definition of what critical race theory is so that perhaps we can have a better understanding and we can be able to discern what's really factual and what's not factual.
Sure. And you're being very nice, you're being very kind because there has been a tremendous amount of ignorance coming from all circles about what critical
All
race theory
circles.
is, from all circles, white, black, preachers, activists, and so
Yes.
forth, who are hearing things probably on their favorite cable channel, i.e. Fox News, i.e. CNN, and various other places that all you're able to get from those sources are sound bites
Right.
and talking points. I mean, they tend to cover most things for a minute or two. And so to try and whittle down all that is critical race theory in a minute or two, when this has been a part of American history and culture for 400 years, is definitely going to produce a lot of confusion and ignorance. So
So,
all that's
so please, yes, please, because from my vantage point, all I hear are people who oppose critical race theory, just oppose it right out, all parts of it. All I hear them say, Pastor Corbett, is that it makes white people feel guilty, and then it's telling black people you're teaching your children they can't be everything they need to be because of racism. That's all I'm hearing. Okay. For those who just outright oppose every aspect of this critical race theory. So I cannot wait until you give us the definition, define it
yes.
for us.
So let's start with the title itself, critical race theory. And let's start with the first word, critical. So the word itself, critical, tells us that critique is being made of race theory. Okay? So as I said a
Hmm.
moment ago, African American civil rights lawyers, law professors, law students, and others in the legal community begin to critique race, racism, racialization as it relates to the law, and
Okay.
specifically how the law addressed the issues of race and racism and so on. So if you start with the name itself, it gives you a clue. Critical race theory. So this is a critique of racial theories relating to the law. All right, that's my paraphrase. But let's go to the sources of critical race theory, and I want to just quote several of their definitions. So in the book, Critical Race Theory, the key writings that formed the movement, those authors define critical race theory as leftist scholars, most of them scholars of color, who challenge the ways in which race and racial powers are constructed and represented in American legal culture and more generally in American society as a whole. So that definition is pretty instructive about what critical race theory is. It tells us that the scholars, the legal scholars who critiqued racial theories and how it all relates to the law are what you would classify as leftists, left-leaning, okay, left of center. They're not conservative. Now, for some people, that makes them demons. That makes them bad people because they are on the left, okay? On the left just simply means, and I don't even like getting into those terms. I was telling someone just yesterday, if we're going to talk about these issues, I prefer we talk about them in terms of righteousness and justice, not
Yes.
liberal, conservative, not left, right. Those are political terms that really do nothing but make caricatures of people, and they don't necessarily tell you where a person stands, okay? But since they use the term, they use it for a purpose. I will, not omit the term. So these are scholars who are left of center. And they just had, as I explained, a problem with the fact that the legal system was doing a poor job and still is. I'm in this thing. I'm in the legal system every day. And I'll come to that in a moment. Is doing a poor job of addressing and redressing racism and white supremacy and systemic racism that continues to plague our country. If we are the greatest democracy, which includes having the greatest legal system in the world, why hasn't it addressed and redressed racism better than it has over 4 centuries? That should be enough time to sincerely deal with this. Now, that doesn't mean we've not made progress. We've made some progress. But as you heard Dr. King say in his speech, in many ways, African Americans are worse off today than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Well, clearly, it's awesome that, slavery has been abolished, but the badges and incidents of slavery are still very much with us. And the critical race theorists are, just question why and what can be done to reconstruct the legal system in such a way that it can become better equipped to handle racism. Now,
And can I just interrupt, because I think when you said the legal system, asked the question, why? With us being ministers of the gospel also, you would think that the church also would be asking the question, why? You know what I'm saying? So I know you'll get into this later as we continue dealing with the topic, but I think that's something that we need to be asking ourselves, why the church has not also asked the question and also begin to lead a movement. We know how God used Dr. Martin Luther King, but if things are still going on, why the church is not more involved with answering these questions that we see going on in our culture today?
Yes,
I just wanted to say that.
yeah, and I think once again you're being very kind in your remarks, because I think we could say that large bodies, large segments of the white church is not asking the question why. In fact, large segments of the white church, white evangelicals in particular, have been complicit with racism, and in many ways are now doing everything they everything they can to cover up that racism in America. And
Right.
there are also parts of the African American church that is also turning a blind eye to issues of biblical justice, despite the Word of God being replete with God's demand and call for justice. And you're right, we will get into that, probably part 2 of this, because we
Okay.
intend to continue this into next week, which will be the weekend that we celebrate Juneteenth and Father's Day. So it would be very appropriate to, I think, conclude this message on that weekend. So in the book, Critical Race Theory, an Introduction, law professor Richard Delgado defines critical race theory as a collection of activists and scholars engaged in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. And I would add, as those topics relate to the law. Okay, once again,
Okay.
this kind of focuses and centers on the law. All right. So critical race theorists consider many, and I want to point this out because I think some people confuse critical race theorists with critical legal studies theorists. There are 2 different groups here. There is a group of white scholars, liberal scholars, who are somewhat aligned with critical race theorists, okay? But there's some misalignment too. I mean, the critical race theorists even hold their liberal, leftist, white colleagues accountable in many ways.
Okay.
Yet the average person out there giving commentary about critical race theory either lumps them all together or they confuse the two groups. And there's a lot of difference there. Richard Delgado goes on to say the critical race theorist movement considers many of the same issues that conventional civil rights and ethnic studies discourses take up, but places them in a broader perspective that includes economics, history, setting, group, and self-interest and emotions and the unconscious. He goes on to say, unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. Now, I wish I had time to get into all of that, but essentially, as I just said, critical race theory is and has critiqued a lot of what even white liberals embrace and propagate as civil rights jurisprudence.
Okay. So then you're saying they tend to be probably even more, I guess, I don't
Radical,
know if the word
radical,
radical,
critical race,
right?
yes,
Radical.
yeah, yeah. That's the way to look at
Okay.
it. The critical race theorists are more radical. They want to get this done because remember, a lot of them are black, so
Right. Right.
they have lived it. Okay,
Right.
some of them are first generation lawyers. Some of them are first generation college graduates. Some of them are descendants of slaves, enslaved people. So they are not looking at it from an academic perspective like many of their white liberal colleagues. They're
Okay.
like they're like, let's get this done, and the reason we're not getting it done is because some of you white liberals, you're sitting back in your ivory towers and writing your books, citing and quoting each other without coming to the source of these issues, hearing from us and really addressing them. And so as a result, change is slow. You know, it's
Right.
incremental, like Professor Delgado says. It's step by step. It's taken a whole long time to get things done that should have been done, 100 years ago.
Right.
Now, one more
Okay.
definition from the Black's Law Dictionary. Black's Law Dictionary defined critical race theory as a reform movement within the legal profession, particularly within academia, whose adherents believe that the legal system has disempowered racial minorities. That is a very succinct definition, but I think it gets right to the point of why critical race theorists are up in arms about the legal system. They believe, as do I, that the legal system has essentially disempowered racial minorities. Okay?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so Black's Law, one other thing. Black's Law Dictionary goes on to say that critical race theorists observe that even if the law is couched in neutral language, it cannot be neutral because those who fashion it had their own subjective perspectives that once enshrined in law have disadvantaged minorities and even perpetuated racism.
Now, if anybody being honest, Pastor Corbett, who would say that's not true? I mean, if you if you know history and you see the effects, I mean, this is documented these are documented facts. We had redlining, we have environmental racism, where companies, put their corporations with all these dangerous fumes and causing, black children to have asthma disproportionately. I mean, you have it everywhere where we have seen the results of the racism, and it comes
And
from the laws
and
and practices and policies,
and here's
not
the point.
individuals.
Here's the point. The point that the critical race theorists are making is the redlining, the resegregation of public schools, and all the other stuff that you could sit here and name, mass incarceration, all of that has occurred despite the neutral language of the law. All that has occurred despite the Brown versus Board of Education case. All of that has occurred despite the fact that we have the 14th Amendment, despite the fact that we have the 15th Amendment. We're still being disenfranchised. We're still being we're still being told we can't protest any longer. We're still facing a lot of the same systemic racism, although the law supposedly is neutral and has been improved over the years. That's their
Wow.
point.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I can see, I can see, you know, why they would make that point. Because if the law's supposed to be so neutral and what they like to say is colorblind, then why do we still see the consequences affecting one minority group so much more disproportionate than other groups, than the dominant group?
So that's why it is frustrating to hear, especially uninformed African Americans out here saying these derogatory things about critical race theory when they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, allow the folks who are in these schools and in the Justice Department and in the White House and Congress and these various powerful places, allow the African American scholars and lawyers who are there, judges, etc., who are there challenging the law. Don't critique them, fine, but don't disparage them when they are putting their finger on something that is really, really important.
So let me ask you this then. How are they getting, or would you comment on, we've seen African American parents, say, well, no, I tell my kids they can be anything, they can do anything. Are people having just a confusion about what systemic racism is? Because we know, um, we taught our children, you work hard, you do what you're supposed to do, keep God first in your life. You can be anything you want to be. But we also educated them on the history and the barriers that the larger society has placed on a group of people which they are members of. I mean, I don't understand. Just help me understand why somebody would say, well, this critical race theory is teaching us to teach our children, that they can't overcome. When we're looking at, in my mind, when we talk about white supremacy and white dominance, we're looking at the on a macro level of the systems and the policies and the practices and the procedures that have been put in place to keep our kids. But yet, most black people, black parents are telling their kids, but you still overcome. You still do what you got to do as we fight to dismantle these policies and these laws and these practices. Help me. Do you
Yeah,
understand what I'm trying to say?
I
Just
do.
please help me.
Sure.
Because let me
Um,
say something else. Let me say something else. There was one teaching you did what you said, to help people understand we're not talking about individual races. I remember you taught that when um I don't know why I'm drawing Rosa Parks. When Rosa Parks sat on the bus, she was not challenging just the white bus driver or the whites on riding on the bus with her. She was challenging the law and the policy, and the practices. So white dominance and white supremacy is above just one individual person, because you can have blacks in these organizations in our country who are yet propagating white supremacy just because they're in that position, and the systems that they have to work within has been founded on some racist practices and policies. I mean, I have done training myself, you know, on undoing racism as a state employee, because the state at that time recognized, why are black children being disproportionately placed in foster care. They realized that, and they dealt with it with the employees. And they had some of us to do training for the whole staff across the state about that. But then so just help me, because I can
Yeah.
go on and on.
So, so there's so much there. We don't come. We don't come to this to these issues of race and racism. Just unilaterally or out of a vacuum. We've been in this country 4 centuries. We've gone from chattel property through a system of Jim Crow, through a system of systemic racism, and now we're seeing a discrimination that is really almost covert. Although the last 4 or 5 years, again, I think from the election of Donald Trump, it's become even more overt now. But it has been sort of in the background. So, for example, when the average white person has 8, 10 times more wealth than the average black person, we still have a long ways to go.
Right.
When there are 2.5 million, almost 2.5 million incarcerated persons, and a disproportionate percentage of them are African American men, we have a long ways to go. When a disproportionate percentage of those kids in public schools that are being kicked out, that are being pushed out, are African American males who are not reading at grade level, whose scores tend to fall greatly beneath their white and Asian counterparts, we still have a long ways to go. And I could go on because other laws are being implemented to further relegate us back to that same place that Rosa Parks fought for us to get out of, 60, 70 years ago. And that is to the back of the bus. So now we can ride anywhere on the bus. But here's the thing. Most of us can't get decent corporate executive jobs at the bus company. The rest of us can't, many of us don't own a bus company. So we're just needing to take our progress to the next level.
Right.
That is the reason why I wanted the audience today to hear Dr. King talk about 2 Americas. Okay? When we're seeing black people being shot by police officers and pretty much are getting away with it, the officers, and we're seeing whites get another kind of treatment from police officers. And let me lump this in. When we're seeing black on black violence, that is the result of concentrated poverty, dilapidated schools, poor education system, okay? Broken families, that is the result of a legacy of racism. again, we still have a long ways to go. This fight is not over in this country. That is the point that the critical race theorists are making. We still have a long ways to go, and a part of the hindrance of getting to the next level is the law. Okay?
Okay.
The law, its
Right.
application, as well as in many cases, its enactment. Okay?
Right.
Now, I think you also said, you asked early on in your question, why were some people just out here saying these things about critical race theory? I think there are primarily two reasons: confusion, okay? Confusion and fear, and I would add ignorance, okay? Once again, we live in a society where people will Google stuff and think they have learned what something means. I mean, it's,
Right.
you know, that's crazy.
That is crazy.
But people do it all the time. So, you know, white Americans, the ones who are, like I told you, in 2000 was when I heard critical race theory, and my professor is the one who told me about it, who told the class about it, and he used it in a pejorative sense. So the white law professors, the white academicians, they have been attacking critical race theory for a long time. Okay, it has become something in the public, you know, for the last year or so. Again, I connect it with Donald Trump. All right, but that demonization of critical race theory has been going on for a long time in legal circles. Okay.
So let me ask you this, and I think you've probably been answering it the entire discussion. So why is it so controversial? If you can just bottom it out,
Well,
why is it so controversial?
rather than bottoming it out, that's a beautiful segue for me to go into some of the core beliefs of what critical race theory is.
Okay.
Is that okay? All right. So first, quickly, what are the goals of the critical race theorists? And I kind of been saying it, but let me say it succinctly. Number one, critical race theorists want to deconstruct civil rights laws. Okay? Deconstruct. That means to pull it apart, to dismantle it, critique it, analyze it, get to the root of the problem. Just deconstruct it. So that they can do the next thing, which is to reconstruct it. And this time, reconstruct it in the way that truly addresses systemic racism, that truly addresses it. Okay? And then the third thing is then to instruct American society on how now we can really move forward toward dismantling white supremacy and making America really live up to its documents, you know, that all men are created equal and endued with certain inalienable rights, you know, all that.
Right. Right.
All right, now, so that brings me to the major sort of gripes or beliefs or tenets of critical race theory. And I think this is going to answer your question about why is there so much hysteria and anger, especially amongst many whites and even some black conservatives about critical race theory. All right, number one, critical race theorists believe that racism is normal, that it is not an aberration, that it is as American as apple pie, that it is in the water, it's in the air, it's in the soil. I heard one politician, black politician, say racism is in the soil of America. It is not, unlike what that Georgia Board of Education's resolution said, that racism is a deviation from American principles. No, it's not. The critical race theorists very strongly believe, and I think anyone with any honesty and common sense would agree, that racism is normal in America. Now, we had Senator Tim Scott, even President Joe Biden, and even the first African-American woman vice president to all say that America is not a racist country, that racism is not normal. Well, all three of those people are politicians, right? Politicians say what politicians got to say. But those of us who are not looking to get reelected to anything can just speak the truth. And the truth of the matter is, America is replete with systemic racism, and a whole lot of individual racists as well. But the systemic racism is truly the issue. So the first thing that the critical race theorist believes, and I with them, is that racism in America is not an aberration, it's normal. And I think that is one of the most controversial beliefs of the critical race theorists, to answer your question.
Okay. Right. Yes,
Right? Because white Americans don't want to believe that, they don't want to hear that, they don't
Right.
want to accept that. Okay?
Right.
They, basically try to say that everybody is equal, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, that, by your own merit, you can get where you're going. And some of that is true. And as you pointed out, we've taught our own children that. We believe that to be true to some degree. But that's not completely true. Even still today, we still have not gotten to this post-racial society. We're not there.
Right. We are not there. And I had seen on Dr. Bernice King's online comments, she said she's so tired of people just twisting and manipulating her father's words, where he said for everybody to be, judged on the basis of the content of their character and not the color of their skin. She said they have just taken and run with that. And she gets so frustrated with that. And that's what we hear a lot of the people who are critical of the critical race theory use Dr. King's words. They don't mention the two Americas that he was teaching and preaching in the clip that you showed at the beginning of this broadcast. You know, we would all, the ideal would be for everybody to be judged on the content of their character and not their skin color. Well, I wish they had thought about that, back then, 1619, that would have been a good place to have that thought in mind. So I think you brought up some very good points, Pastor Corbett. And I think
Well, I got a few more here, beliefs and
okay,
tenets of critical race theories. That's just the first one, actually.
okay, but please continue.
Okay, so another one, and these are all very important ones. The critical race theorists believe that race is a social construct. They believe that humans created the concept of race and races. It's not something that God created. It's not a divine invention. It is human made. It's made by man and then used to distribute wealth and power. And I actually remember something that your research found, that has always stuck out to me, and that is you found research that showed that humans are 99.9% the same,
Right.
and the only difference is like 0.0%. Am I saying it right?
Exactly. Right. We're all statistically the same, and not just statistically, but 99.9% the same biologically, you know. Um, we're the same. The thing is, the social construct came about when society tried to categorize people based upon their external features, because internally, biologically, physiologically, we're the same. We are the same. We're made in God's image. God, all humans come from the same blood, came from Adam and Eve. So internally, physiologically, biologically, we are the same as far as that is concerned. But because of external differences, we get these categories, which they now call race. In the social science field, they like to say more ethnic groups or whatever. But yeah,
I think ethnicity is more in alignment with the Word of God as well. Because it really focuses more on culture than it does these
right,
physical traits that you're talking about.
right,
So
right.
yes, so the critical race theorists love pointing out that race is a social construct. However, it has been used by largely whites to determine how wealth, how power is distributed, and who is and who's not worthy of this or that, who is or who's not intelligent, who is or who's not fully human. In so many different ways, that false social construct has been used to oppress. Okay?
Right.
All right. The critical race theorists believe in something called interest convergence. Interest convergence, which simply means that the white power structure typically will not allow racial progress unless it is to their advantage. Okay? Their interest in seeing racial progress must also benefit. Okay? There has to be some benefit before they will allow there to be racial progress. And I say allow,
Okay.
I know that's, I don't necessarily like using that word but my point is they are still the majority in this country. We see
Right.
them right now in many states passing all kinds of racist laws. So they still wield considerable power. And my point is, and the point of the critical race theorists is, they will not allow the further racial progress unless it is clearly made to them how whites will benefit from that. Okay?
Okay.
Derek Bell, Professor Derek Bell, wrote a great article, several, books and so forth. I got a lot of his material, where he pointed out even the Brown versus the Board of Education case was handed down because whites were trying to appear to be a fair, democratic society internationally. Okay?
Okay.
They were sort of looking bad in these other parts of the world where they were trying to promote democracy and trying to get a foothold in other countries so that they could, gain some sort of economic advantage in those countries. But those countries were looking at them and saying, hold it, wait a minute. Look at how you're treating and have treated blacks.
Right.
So
Right.
Professor Bell said the Brown versus the Board of Education case was an example of them saying, basically, we need to do this because we are getting a lot of bad publicity. We need to make this happen so that we can advance our interests internationally. That's an example of interest convergence.
In fact, we even saw that here recently. I remember Secretary of State Tony Blinken when he was with, I forgot the foreign leader, but the foreign leader, they were in a meeting and it got kind of heated, and that foreign leader told our Secretary of State, "Well, I think you all got some work to do at home, because the George Floyd had happened and all the unrest that was going on in the streets." So definitely, internationally and globally, America, we purport democracy, and we want other countries to be democratic. But then they turn it back on us and say, "Well, look at what you all got going on over there." So yeah, that's
Exactly.
still
Yes.
going on.
Professor Delgado points out in his book, Critical Race Theory and Introduction, he points out that poor whites don't really benefit from the way rich whites have, distributed wealth and power in this country, but poor whites tend to yet go along with that because they get sort of a psychological benefit from it. They get sort of a psychological, emotional, mental benefit of being able to say, well, yeah, we're still better than them.
Right.
Okay, still better than
Yes.
these folks. All right.
Yes.
But he points out that the very wealthy white power structure, the oligarchs of America, oftentimes sell out working and poor whites. But again, because of that psychological benefit that working poor whites get, they still continue to just support these folks. One case in point there is, we talked about equal pay for men and women, and how the GOP had basically opposed equal pay for women. I mean, that's hard to get your head around why, the average working poor white woman would support a politician who doesn't want to see her make the same money that a man makes, and they're both doing the same work.
Right. You can't make sense out of it
You can't.
other than what you just said. There's still some psychological benefit that, it's got to be us against them type, I guess, attitude. And, at least we still want the whites to stay in power so that we can say that we're above the blacks or whatever. So, yeah, it's deep.
Okay.
It runs deep.
All right. Another core belief or tenet of critical race theorist is intersectionality. And it very simply means that none of us are one thing. We are black and men. And as a black man, we deal with different types of racism. And certainly black females deal with other types of discrimination and racism that intersects, right? We are black and Christian.
Right.
We are black and poor, right? We are black and oftentimes uneducated. So all of these different social and racial status intersect and can cause the discrimination to be a double, sometimes even triple, quadruple whammy, so to speak.
Right. Right.
think about COVID-19. I mean, COVID-19, I think, really brought home this thing of intersectionality, where blacks have died disproportionately because they're black, because they're poor, because they are, essential workers. They have health disparities. I mean, 4 or 5 different types of intersections of disadvantages that results in that
Right.
disproportionate percentage of death from COVID-19.
Right.
You mentioned color blindness. Wow, I could really spend some time on this whole notion of color blindness as a lawyer. Okay. So the standard thought is the law, equal justice means being colorblind. And, Lady Justice has the blindfold on her. People love, are very fond of quoting, as you said, Dr. King, when he said, "My children ought to be judged from the content of their character, not the color of their skin." And from that, a lot of especially the white liberal legal scholars, propose and support this notion of color blindness. But let me just briefly tell you why I, in many cases, disagree with the colorblind approach where the law is concerned. There are circumstances and situations where a person's or a people's race should be taken in consideration. Okay? For example, let's talk about the Voting Rights Act. So we know the Voting Rights Act was gutted in a case called Shelby County versus Holder by the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it was 2012, 2013. And essentially, the U.S. Supreme Court said that the Voting Rights Act really was no longer needed because blacks, who were once an insular group, who was once a targeted minority group, is no longer in that status. He wrote in the opinion, they just elected and reelected the first black president. So why do they need special treatment? Okay, along the lines of race. And that is
Right.
the position of a lot of black conservatives. Okay.
Right.
A lot of black conservatives take issue with blacks receiving any kind of special treatment along the lines of race because they argue, Clarence Thomas is one on the court who believes this strongly. They argue that, race is not a big issue anymore. We are beyond those days. And it's wrong. There are times when black Americans need special treatment. Affirmative action is one. Why? Because we still deal with a system of systemic racism. We still deal with institutionalized racism. So there's no point, as the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, I would disagree with Justice Ginsburg on many issues, okay? But where it comes to race, I strongly agree with her in that opinion when she said it doesn't make sense to take down the umbrella until the rain has stopped.
Right.
As long as it's still raining, there is the need for the umbrella. And so there is
Right.
the need for race consciousness in the law when there is still racism that is systemically, institutionally affecting African Americans.
Right.
So this is a huge, huge part of critical race theorists. And I think this is also a reason why it is controversial. I hope I explained
Okay.
that okay.
No, you did. Excellent. I thought that was excellent. Yeah. So I think, have you gone over all of
There's
what
there's one
you?
there's one last thing, and I'll briefly say it. The critical race theorists believe that the folks who tend to write a lot of the civil rights laws and comment on them and write law review articles and advise the politicians, again, are white liberal scholars. But those white liberal scholars need to rely more on the voices from the bottom, they like to say. The critical race theorists
Okay.
like to say. You need to talk to the folks who are experiencing this. You're dealing with this from an academic perspective, and we see that all the time. I think that's some of the reason why somebody like Joe Manchin or Senator Sinema, and even some other Democrats are not in full support of the Voting Rights Act, because they're white and their voting rights are not being impacted by the laws that are being passed across states. And these
Right.
are Democrats. These are considered people who are at least progressive, liberal, but they don't get it because they will not be impacted by these laws.
Right.
So that's why, the NAACP and Reverend William Barber and other groups of blacks have gone to Manchin's office or are planning to meet with him so he can hear from the people who will be impacted by these laws. And
Right.
critical race theorists, that I strongly agree with them, that oftentimes the people making these decisions are not impacted by the laws that they're making, even well-intentioned white people.
Right. So yes, I really appreciate all of this. Um, I mean, boatload of information that you have shared with us today. It's been
Scratching the surface,
enlightening.
actually, just scratching the
Yes.
surface. As in my law practice, Chloe and I, every day see how the law, in subtle ways, oftentimes, just create different outcomes for African Americans who come into the legal system oftentimes with tremendous disadvantages that the law
Mm-hmm.
will not take into account because of this colorblind concept. And she and I have to spend a lot of our time sensitizing prosecutors, judges, juries to the disadvantages that our clients tend to bring to the table.
Yes. Well, let me share. I don't think I even mentioned this to you, Pastor Corbett. The other night we were in bed and you had the television on, and I believe it could have been Nightline, and they showed a story of this man in Missouri, a black man who had been incarcerated 43 years. And now they realize he was wrongfully convicted. Did you see that? Did you go back and look at that?
Yes.
He was wrongfully convicted. They realized it. Okay. He was at home during the time, supposedly, I believe it was a double, triple murder. He was at home, but somehow or another, he got convicted. And it was because I believe the assistant district attorney did not turn over some discovery, some evidence that would have um, exonerated him. He would have been found not guilty. So eventually the ADA got disbarred, which is something that they said never, never happens.
In
But
fact, that
this
he was a
man,
Dallas County DA,
really,
assistant district attorney. Yes.
wow. So what has happened? This man is still in prison to this day, and the new ADA in Missouri is trying
Oh,
to say this is wrong. You all, we need to let this
let,
man go.
let me correct myself, Tony, before you finish. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I was confusing. There was a recent assistant district attorney here in Dallas County who was disbarred for withholding some evidence in another case. But the case you're talking about in Missouri, I am familiar with that case because the governor said something that was just really, really, really
Right. The
outrageous.
governor,
The
the
governor,
governor would
yes.
not. The governor, in fact, you're right. We both are getting mixed up because this ADA who tried this man is now deceased, okay? But he did not turn over some evidence. And then so in the first trial, this black man, there was a hung jury. And then the ADA came back and said, well, we're going to retry you, and I bet you won't get off this time. And now you and Chloe can talk more about this, but there was one black juror who held out on the first trial, which caused it to be a hung jury. The second trial, this ADA made it such that there were no blacks on the jury panel, and he was found guilty. He's been in prison 43 years. And you all listen to this. The people who committed the murder, they confessed to it. They went to prison. They are out of prison to this day. And the other man is still in prison. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah,
Why
and
is this?
the
It,
governor said, if it's the same case that I'm thinking about, the governor is on record as saying that this man's clemency application is not top priority. Is that the same
I said,
case?
I know the governor, it was the state Supreme Court in Missouri declined to do something with this case. And the governor is declining to do something with this case
Yeah,
now.
this is the
Like I
same
said, I was
case.
about sleep. All I know is I started crying. I mean, this man is now in a wheelchair. They say he would have been, I believe, the longest serving inmate who has now been declared he did not commit the crime that is still in prison. So it,
And that's because the governor
I,
says that his application is not prioritized. And I think there are some several thousand clemency applications, but the governor's refusing to give this one any special attention.
and the ADA, she's a white woman. She's saying this is just wrong. We have got to make this right. So I see why you lawyers see how race impacts law, you know, in this country. And that was just one anecdotal example, but it just touched me. I'm really praying that they will let this man out before he dies. You know,
Yeah,
he's
I
60
mean,
something years old.
being an attorney and in the court system every day, when my staunchly conservative black brothers tell me that racism is a thing of the past and this victimization, I completely rule that out. I reject it because I see it every day anecdotally, and I see it in the research, in the studies
Exactly.
that I've
Exactly. There
done.
is research.
There
Yes.
is there is documented research. It is not even debatable. But some of them are just so uninformed. I'll be nice. Uninformed, okay? That they're just out here with these talking points and bullet points
Yes.
and sound bites, not
Yes.
knowing what they're talking about. We
Right.
see this
Right.
every day, anecdotally and in the research. America,
Exactly.
as the critical race theorists say, racism is normal in this country. It's not an aberration. It is not a deviation. It is designed. It's cooked in the system. There are still racist provisions in the Constitution to this day. Still
Yes.
slave codes. Okay? So I don't want to even hear that. All right? I know better. I have a
Right.
backstage pass with my law license. I can see it. I deal with it. And
Amen.
it was the reason
Amen.
why I wrote this book, Education and Justice, by the way, because
Right.
I saw it when I was a public school teacher. Okay? Saw the same thing. And
Yes.
so don't talk to me about whether there's any systemic racism or not. I know better. I
Right.
know better. I started, as we're ending right here, Tony, but I do want to read
Okay.
something that I said in this book that I wrote. The first edition I wrote in 2006, I believe it was. I may not be able to find the part that I'm looking for. Yes, right here. I said this: amazingly, more than 50 years after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that the separate but equal doctrine was unconstitutional and ordered public schools to desegregate with all deliberate speed, African American children, especially African American boys, still are not getting an equal education. They are overrepresented in school suspensions, expulsions, special education classes, dropouts, yet they're underrepresented in gifted and talented classes and college enrollment. Okay, I wrote these words in 2006, okay,
Right.
which was 50 something years after the Brown versus Board of Education case. And
Right.
so at that time, I was just as disheartened from the results of the Brown case in many ways as the critical race theorists are and were, and wrote about
Right.
it here in my book.
And you updated the book in 2015. I believe it was
2016.
2015. 2016, you updated it. So
That's
it
right.
even now includes the school to prison pipeline and even more recent data. So you all out there, if you have children in public schools, and especially young Black boys, I really recommend you getting this book. It's thoroughly researched. It's not just an opinion from Pastor Corbett. It is thoroughly researched. He went to Duke University, used their facility, and researched this book. It's full of good information that can help parents navigate your child through the public school system, because we know that this racism has impacted us educationally and economically, as well as many other things. But those two things are really, really impacting us in a very serious way.
Yes.
So we want to give you all the available tools and resources that we know and have. So, Pastor Corbett, I
I do.
appreciate. Oh, go
Yes, I
on.
do want to say one thing that may cause some misunderstanding. You said I went to Duke University where I did the research. I researched the book at Duke University, but I didn't attend Duke University.
Right.
I went to North Carolina A&T undergrad and North Carolina Central University School of Law, two HBCUs that I'm very proud to say that I am graduates of. But yes, Duke University allowed me for 2 years to use their facilities and resources to research the topic in this book. And, so I still to this day, I shout them out. Go Duke Blue Devils, by the way.
Yes.
I just lost you right there, didn't I?
You lost me totally. But thanks for clarifying it, because yes,
My wife is a diehard Tar Heels fan, okay? And
well,
we're both
now
North
that we,
Carolinians. We're
but
both
now
North
that,
Carolinians, and you have to choose which side of 40 you're going to support. Is it going to be over here where Durham is, or over here where Chapel Hill is? I'm on the Durham side.
well, now I have some uneasy feelings about UNC Chapel Hill now, because they denied Nicole Hannah Jones tenure professorship because of her 1619 project. They got some real heavy duty pressure from some wealthy donors. The board of trustees
You
did
better be
with the
careful though,
UNC.
because your Tar Heel
Uh,
colleagues are going to kick you to the curb if you keep on
I'm
talking
just
like
I'm
that.
I'm just saying, fair is fair.
And,
Let me
and
quote. For
you're
I,
just
the
saying
Lord,
that.
love justice. My God, my Savior loves justice. Isaiah 61:8, Psalm 37:28. For the Lord loves justice. The Lord says, be fair minded and just, do what is right. So I got truth on my side.
I just gave you a clap for all that. But I'm telling you, your UNC Tar Heel colleagues are disappointed. Caleb, for example, he's sitting over there thinking, oh, what has happened to mom? What has happened? And Chloe, she's
They
thinking,
were
what is
wrong.
going on with the, so, but yeah,
They
I
were
mean,
wrong. The board
yeah,
of
they were wrong.
trustees, from my understanding, the professorship and the UNC Chapel Hill itself recommended that Nicole Hannah Jones be tenured. But when it went to the board of trustees, the upper level, that's when she got all of this pushback. So yeah, I'm all about
Well,
righteousness and justice.
not to mention, and since you're going in that direction, not to mention the cheating scandal, not to mention that
Oh
too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't even mention that. Okay, we would let. It's time to get off. It's time to get off the air.
All right, yes, you all. Thank you for tuning in. As we talked about a biblical and legal response to critical race theory. Next week, we're going to wrap it up as we talk about whether or not critical race theory is consistent with Scripture. Okay, that's going to
Right.
be the
So
topic
today,
next week.
right. Today we focus more on the legal, and next week we will pivot to the biblical response to critical race theory. We hope you all receive something from this. Please remember to go to our YouTube channel. It's Salt Makers Church. We did change the name of our online outreach to Kingdom Encounter, but our YouTube channel is Salt Makers Church. And please, if you don't know anything about critical race theory, begin to do your own research. Do not depend upon sound bites, talking points. And I pray that Pastor Corbett was able to shed some light and some understanding on this topic that is really, really getting a lot of buzz across the nation.
Yeah, before we get out of here, my first cousin, Milton James, back in North Carolina,
Mhm.
who is a huge UNC fan. Oh my God, he is a huge, huge, huge fan. And yeah, he tuned in today and said he liked what he heard today. And so I'm just so glad to see him. But that tells me he didn't hear you say what you said about the Tar Heels, Tony. That he didn't hear that part. He didn't hear
I
that
know,
part.
I
He
know,
didn't hear that part.
I
All
know,
right.
I
All
know.
right. Thank you for tuning in, cuz. And all the rest of you all, thank you for your comments and everything. It was good. Please share this. Get this out to as many
Yes,
people as possible. And again, you all are just terrific, wonderful people. We've been up here quite some time today, but it was all worth
wow.
it. All worth it. About 2 hours, but all
Oh
worth it. We
my,
had to discuss this. Yes, we had to
yes,
discuss this. Okay.
because we believe in being equipped with knowledge. So share this knowledge. Pastor Corbett shares knowledge that he has from his training, and please share the knowledge with your family and friends on your online community.
Yeah. In fact, my cuz says, like what I heard, we'll be tuning in again. Go Heels. I knew he was going to get it in. I knew he was going to get it in. All right, y'all. God bless y'all.
Bye bye.